Let's write a serious Python program now. We'll download a zip file from the internet, extract a CSV file from it, process the data, and generate an Excel sheet with the top moving stocks of a given day. So let's go through what the input and output of this program will be, and we'll go through step by step what the program will actually do. As an input, the program needs a downloaded file from the National Stock Exchange website. The file that we'll download is a zip file with the stock information for today. So it will have all the stocks which were traded on the stock exchange and their opening price, closing price, and other information about the stocks for that given day. The output is an Excel file. It will have the top movers and the most heavily traded stocks for that day. The input file is zipped because it's a pretty big file. It has all the information about all the stocks for one day. So it needs to be unzipped. The Excel file needs to be created cell by cell. You need to say what data should be present in each cell of the Excel file's worksheet. So how do we get from this input to output? Step 1 is to download the zip file from the internet. Python has a 2-line way to download a file from an internet URL and then save it to a file on your local disk. In fact, the first line of this you've already done if you've done our exercise on downloading a URL from the internet. But there is a catch. The NSE tries to block automated scraping by programs. So if the NSE feels like a program is trying to access the website, it will block it. So we need to jump through a few hoops to convince the NSE that it's a human downloading the file and not a program. At the end of step 1, you should have a zip file in a location that you specified on your local disk. So step 2 is to unzip this zip file and get a CSV file extracted from the zip file. Before you do that, you need to make sure step 1 works and the zip file that you expect to look for actually exists. Then open the zip file. Remember how we said a file is like a barrel, and in order to get the contents of the barrel, you need to open the barrel first. Then we'll use a library to get a list of all the files inside the zip file. We'll use a for loop to do so. This is like pouring out of the barrel. So we'll use a for loop to iterate through each file and extract it. We'll keep track of the list of files that we have unzipped in a list, so that we'll know which are the files that we have extracted from within the zip file. Now, at the end of all of this, you have to remember to close the zip file. You have to close the barrel once you are done with it. Otherwise, the contents of the barrel can get contaminated. We've discussed the steps involved in doing this before. Let's now code it up. The first step, as we've already discussed, is to download a zip file from the website of the National Stock Exchange. So we've done part of this before. We've used the URL-lib2 library to download a URL. It's pretty simple, it's just one line of code. So let's first initialize a variable with the URL to download. This is the website of the National Stock Exchange of India. It publishes each day a bunch of interesting market-related data. We'll call this URL of file name, and we'll enter the URL of the National Stock Exchange website where we can get this zip file that you are interested in. This is a zip file which is published every day for the market movements of the previous day. So once you've initialized the variable, let's just make sure that there's no typo in what we've typed in. So we will just get this URL and check out if we are able to download the file from this URL or not. So yeah, the URL works. Let's move on. Let's also initialize a variable where we'll store the path on our local disk where we want to store the contents of this URL. So on our local disk, we're going to specify a path where the downloaded file can reside. So the path or the folder where we're storing this is up to you, but the file name should be the same as the file name of the file that we are going to download from the internet. That's just a way for us to keep track that this is the file that we got from the National Stock Exchange website. So the CM17 July 2015 half2.csv.zip. That's the file name of the file that we downloaded from the NSE's website. And we'll keep the same file name here as well. Next, we're going to write a bit of boilerplate code to jump through a few hoops that the NSE sets for us. Now, the National Stock Exchange website of India doesn't like it when bots or automated scripts attempt to scrape its website. So if a program tries to access it, it'll block it unless they mimic the app behavior of a human trying to download a file from the website. So unless it looks like a human is trying to download it, in which case whenever a human sends a request from a browser to the NSE website, there will be a property set in their browser. This is called the user agent property. So we'll make sure that our request has this user agent property. By the way, you can make it look like your own web browser that is sending the request by googling what's my user agent. Google will send you to a website where you can figure out what's your user agent, and you can copy paste that here as well. You don't have to exactly type in the properties that we typed in here. Okay, now let's get to the actual bit of code that will make the web request to the NSE's website, which will include this header that we just set up. So we'll set up a variable called web request, which includes this strange header that we've typed out. Now, this has not yet downloaded the contents of the URL. We'll make that request now, but before we do that, all of these operations are kind of error prone, so we'll be careful and do some exception handling. So let's use a try except block as safety net. Where inside the try block, the indentation has changed to indicate this. So here we are actually making the download request. URL lib2.url open will download the contents of the page, and it will do so with the header that we have set up. Remember how when we tested the URL, it downloaded a zip file? What we will get as the contents of the page variable is exactly that zip file. So now let's put that zip file into this variable called content by reading the contents of the downloaded URL. We'll save the contents of the zip file to the local path. We are already initialized a path for the file to reside on disk. To save the contents of the zip file, first we open up a new file which has the path that we initialized. So when you don't have any file existing in that particular path, when you use the open command, it will create a new file. The WB is the mode in which we want to open the file. In this case, we are indicating that we intend to write. We are going to put stuff inside our barrel. And the B indicates that this is a binary file and not something like a text file. Zip files are basically binary files. Their contents are stored in a binary format, and they need special programs to extract the contents and read them. Then we are saying we'll write as a byte array the contents of whatever we have downloaded. Byte array is a function from Python's libraries that can take the binary file which is in the variable content and convert it to something that can be written to file. Now that we are done with writing the contents to our file, we have to close it. The barrel needs to be closed before you move on. Otherwise, the contents of the barrel can get corrupted or contaminated. Let's move on to the except block. This is the backup action in case we are not able to do what we said in the previous section of the code in the try block. So only if something is wrong, this particular block of code will get executed. Specifically, we are saying that we want this to handle a particular type of error, which is the HTTP error. This will be thrown if for some reason it's not able to download the file. Maybe the URL is malformed and so on. So in case such an error happens, we are printing the error message to the screen and telling the user that the download did not go through, so they should manually download the file. Let's take our code for a spin. Okay, there's an error, and basically we made a mistake in URL lib2's name. In Python, all the module names and function names are case sensitive. So here we had given a capital L, and that was the mistake that we made. Now this code should run fine, and when you run it, you can go check the path that you specified to see if the file was downloaded to that location or not. And in any case, we're going to check for that the first thing in our next step of the program. So the next step is to unzip the downloaded file and extract the contents as a CSV file. Let's import two modules that could be useful for us in this step: zip file and OS. Zip file is a library that helps us to do file handling for zip files, and OS is a library that helps us to interact with the operating system. For example, if you want to get a list of files in a directory, now we're initializing a variable with the path of the extracted file. So the file which will extract from the zip file will reside here. The first thing we'll do is to check if our zip file was downloaded successfully, or if there was an error in the previous step and there is no zip file in the location we are looking for. So OS is the module that comes in handy here. It can tell us if a particular path exists or a file exists in that path or not. So since we are inside this conditional, our code is indented. All the code that comes next will be executed only if this condition is true. That is, if there is a file in that local zip file path, in which case os. path.exists local zip file path will return true. We'll print a message so that the user knows we found the file and we're continuing on to the next step. So we'll say print that the local file path exists and proceed. Now we are going to go through the zip file and extract as many files as it contains, and ahead of time we really don't know how many files that is. So let's initialize an array which will keep track of the number of files or whatever files we have extracted from our zip file. This array list of files is going to save the names of the files that are extracted from the zip file. Next, we are opening the zip file. As always, whenever we want to do something with the file, we first open the barrel. Note the RB here. R indicates that we are opening the file in a read mode. We're not going to write anything at this moment into the file. And B indicates that this is a binary file. Now, in general, whenever you are working with files, you will need a file handler. So, zip file module will provide us with a zip file handler that can do stuff with files. It can read, write, and can do things in general with zip files. So zip file handler is the variable that we're initializing, which will be the file handler for our local zip file path. Now the zip file handler knows how to read the list of zipped up files. It will give us a list of files. We can iterate over that list in a for loop. One thing to note here, you may have noticed that a lot of the file handling code is actually like boilerplate. You don't really need to understand all the nitty-gritty of what's going on inside the file handler. You just need to know how to use it. And the other advantage is, once you've written this code, you can just reuse it whenever you want to handle a zip file. So zip file handler dot name list will give us the list of all the files inside our zip file. Then for each of those files, we'll iterate through and extract the file and then append the file name to our list of file names. So once again, the steps involved are get the list of file names inside the zip file, extract each file and add the name of the file to our array where we are keeping track of the files. So once you're out of this loop, we are done with extracting all the files from the zip file. Let's just print a message to the user so that he or she knows how many files were extracted. So we'll just print out the length of the array in which we were keeping track of the files that were being extracted. Don't forget to close the zip file at the end of all of this. fh.close will close our file. Just follow this same formula whenever you're dealing with files. Open the file, set up a file handler, do whatever you need to do with the file, and then never forget to close the file. Okay, we've got an error here. We forgot to capitalize the F in the zip file. Since Python is case sensitive, it doesn't recognize that particular name. So our iterator variable file name was not referred to properly inside our loop. We fixed these two mistakes and our code runs fine, and we've basically extracted our CSV file from the zip file. Now as you can see, the zip file only contains one CSV file. So we've successfully downloaded and extracted a CSV file which has the stock movements of all the stocks for 1 day. Let's now go ahead and see how we can process this CSV file to get the top moving stocks.